Hello, welcome to the first in maybe many tutorials. I don't know, depends how this one goes down. You might be literally the only person to ever watch this, so if you are, you're in an exclusive club. Nice one. It's based on this video you can see playing here. I've created a unique antibody specifically for this tutorial. I'm going to drop a download link to the file in the description so you can get it exactly how it looks here, as you can see here. But yeah, it's based on that original video. The techniques and everything that I used to create it are exactly the same. The rendering type, the materials, all that sort of thing are all going to be basically exactly the same. It's just going to look slightly different. Yeah, let's get into it. All right, I'm going to try and rattle through this as quick as possible. There's nothing worse than getting on a tutorial and it's like 200 hours long and you've only got 10 minutes before your project deadline. So hopefully this is going to go as quick as possible. I won't miss out any details that you need. If I do, just ask the questions in the comments. And yeah, if it goes over sort of, I don't know, say 15 minutes, I'll probably make it into like a two-parter. But yeah, let's get going. In the spline menu, hit circle. I'm going to drop the radius down to 100. I'm going to click on the circle and hit C to make it into like an editable object so you can move the points around. With the circle selected, we're going to go into the deformer menu and hit displacer. But before we do that, if you hold down Shift, it puts it in as a child. If you didn't hold Shift, it will just basically drop it in the scene like that. So all you need to do is click on it and drag it onto the circle, and it will put it in as a child. Next thing you want to do is in the shading tab of the displacer, click this little arrow and then press noise. Click on where it says noise and then hit 300% in the global scale. Go back onto the displacer object and then press object tab, put the height at 28. So yours should look something like this. Beautiful. Next thing you want to do is click back on your circle spline, go into the deformer menu and holding down Shift, press twist. Because I was holding down Shift, again, that makes it a child of the object that I had selected. Really useful, but you know, if you accidentally didn't hold Shift, it's not the end of the world. Just click on it and drag it in. In the angle, let's make it 180, and you should have something that kind of looks like this, a twisted kind of deformed circle spline. Alrighty, next thing we want to do is go into here and press sphere. We want to make this only 5 centimeters, nice and small. I'm going to drop these segments down to like 12, 121, 12. The reason being, the less segments we use, the less kind of processing power your computer needs to kind of render it and kind of navigate around the software. When we get into the kind of thousands of kind of objects, you'll be thankful that you drop these segments down, basically. Okay, so we need a Mograph Cloner object. So click Mograph and then Cloner. Where I held down Shift before and it made my object come in as a child, what we want to do is hold down Alt. And if you hold down Alt, it makes the object come in as a parent. So now my cloner is the parent of this sphere. Again, if you accidentally didn't click it, just all you got to do, drag your sphere as a child of the cloner and you are good to go. Okay, the next thing is in the mode. At the moment it's in grid. We want it to be in object. Drag our circle spline into the object that we want it to reference. Let's change the circle spline to antibody. Let's call it a leg. It's not a leg, but we know what we mean, or I do anyway. Antibody leg spline 01. Might just help a little bit later down the line. A good habit to get into as well. Adds on a few extra seconds, but it might save you hours later when you're trying to find something. Okay. The next thing we want to do is go into the cloner, and in the count, we're going to bump this up to, let's say, 1500. All that's doing is basically telling the cloner to clone this object, sphere, along this spline, your antibody leg spline 01, X amount of times. So in our case, 1500 amount of times. So what you get is this kind of almost like a smooth kind of tube look, and that's just because there's so many spheres all kind of overlapping each other. Next thing you want to do with the cloner selected is go into Mograph, Effector, and then press Random. You don't want to hold down Shift or Alt in this instance because yeah, just don't do it, basically. Press random. And what that's done is it's applied this random effector to my cloner object. If you click on the random effector, in the parameter tab, see where it says X, Y, and Z, or X, Y, and Z, 50, 50, 50. Let's put that down to 15 centimeters. So it's just telling it to randomly position these clones in 15 centimeters in X, Y, and Z directions. If you bump it up, it's going to make them further and further away. But for us, we just want it to be at 15. The next thing we want to do is, because our spheres are all literally exactly the same size, it's not very kind of organic looking. I mean, maybe this is like I don't know, it might be a look you're going for, but for us, let me just go into the render view. Kind of looks cool, but for us, we don't want it to look so kind of uniform. So what we want to do is, I'll just rename this sphere 1. If you click on the sphere and then hold down Control if you're on a PC, or Command or the Apple key if you're on a Mac, and drag it down, make sure it's still a child of the cloner. If you accidentally drag it out, just no worries, drag it back in and you're good to go. Let's call that sphere 2, and let's do it again, and then call it sphere 3. Click on sphere 2, and let's change the radius to 10 centimeters. Click on sphere 3, and let's change it to 15. Let's go 14. Let's be really specific for no reason. Okay, so it should look something like this. If you click on your cloner, where we're looking in clones, you'll notice it says iterate. And what iterate means is it's basically going to cycle through all of the objects that are a child of it and iterate through. So it's going to go sphere 1, sphere 2, sphere 3, and so on and so forth, until it counts all the way up to 1500. If you want it to be a little bit more random with how it kind of selects the spheres, what are part of the cloner, if you click on this menu here, clones, iterate, change it to random, instead of it just kind of going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, if you click on random, it actually just randomly kind of dips into this pool of the spheres. So you just get a completely random kind of selection. Really good for kind of making things kind of unique later on, like further down the line. So if you change the seed, it will change the randomness. Doesn't really matter what your number says. It can be whatever. You can type in 1 if you want. Doesn't really matter. Let's just type in 100, because why not? So cool, looking good. Slightly better than before. Still not exactly what we want, but it's getting there. And you can probably start seeing how this is kind of forming. Okay, the next thing we want to do is, so at the moment, this cloner is like individual kind of spheres cloned along this spline, this antibody leg spline, which is great, but it's too thin. The antibody kind of look we're going for is kind of thick and kind of blobby almost, and this kind of gap in the middle of this kind of loop is a lot smaller. So what I'm going to do is create a sweep Nurbs. So you can access the sweep Nurbs. I've got it kind of macroed into this menu up here, but you can access it from, is it this one? This one here, and press sweep. What we want to do is go back into the spline menu and drag, drop another circle in there. Drop the radius of the circle down to, say, 40. Then drag the circle as a child of the sweep. So at the moment, it's still not doing anything. So at the moment, you're telling the sweep to use this circle as the profile and to sweep it along, well, along nothing at the moment, but we want to sweep it along this antibody leg spline. So I'm going to drag it in as a child. And look at that. Looks amazing. At the moment, the cloner is still referencing the spline. What we actually want it to reference now, instead of referencing the spline, we want it to reference the surface of this sweep. So in your object where it says antibody leg spline, we want to click on the sweep and drag this in, and then ta-da. And what you'll notice is the count has been reset down to 20 because you've dragged like a different type of object in there. So all these spheres have basically disappeared. So in this count, let's just bump it back up to 1500. I'm going to turn off the visibility of the sweep by tapping this traffic light icon up here. If you hold Alt, it selects both of them at the same time. So tap it once, and then tap it again, so it goes red. So it's still being used as a reference, but it won't show up in the kind of final render. Okay, so yeah, this is kind of looking cool. It's a lot thicker than we had it before because it's following that kind of shape of the sweep, but it's still not quite what we want. It's a little bit too kind of sparse, doesn't really look kind of blobby, but it's getting there. But again, this might be the look you're going for. So if this is, then brilliant, you're done. Go and have a beer or something, or a coffee, or whatever time it is. Anyway, so we're going to bump up the amount of clones because 1500 just isn't really cutting it at the moment. Let's go 3,000. 3,000. Okay, that's better. It's a lot thicker. Looking good. But still, what we want to do now is bridge that gap between it being basically like a blob of spheres into like one kind of almost kind of solid, kind of gooey, kind of organic object. And the way we're going to do that is by using the volume builder. Now, the technique I show you with this, you can basically transpose to almost anything that you need to kind of create, which is kind of like organic and almost kind of unique looking. It's powerful in lots of different situations, but for these kind of medical animations where things are kind of like cellular and completely unique in kind of every iteration of them, it's just a really powerful tool that I use like almost daily, basically. So you can find a volume builder here with these kind of 3 cubes stacked on top of each other. If you click the menu, select volume builder. If you click on your cloner and drag it as a child of the volume builder, what you're going to get is this kind of like blob of kind of cubes or voxels, as they're called in some places. Well, in all the places. At the moment, it's kind of hard to see all the detail and everything, and the reason for that is the voxel size is 10 centimeters. So it's basically saying every single voxel, these kind of cubes, are going to be 10 centimeters in size. So the resolution's not very high. So we want to drop this down to like 4. And as you can see, when you drop it down to 4, you start getting that kind of shape of the spheres back. But the difference being now is all of the spheres are all kind of connected. It kind of like bridges the gap, almost kind of like kind of metaballs. But if I go to my render view, nothing there, rubbish. And the reason being, it hasn't got any actual like mesh. It's only got like voxel kind of points. Kind of hard to explain, but basically what we want to do is click this menu again and go to volume mesher. Click on the volume builder and make it a child of the mesher, and bang, look at that. It's got volume, it kind of looks organic, and actually this isn't too bad, and we're only really at the kind of early stages of this, but this is, you know, I'd say passable. And you know, if we go back to them kind of references, it's not that far from home. But we're going to keep going, we're going to keep progressing, and let's make it as nice as possible because we want it to look like that original antibody that I showed you in the beginning. So let's carry on going. Okay, the next thing we want to do is we want to go into the SDF smooth part of the volume builder, and if you just tap it, it drops in an SDF smooth, and all that does is it kind of smooths out these points and almost kind of averages between them. There's a little bit more nuance to it, but that's the kind of, top level explanation of it. We're going to put this down to 20%. We only need it to kind of smooth it a little bit. But if I just keep switching it on and off, so that's off, then when we switch it on, see how it kind of smooths the objects out a little bit. And we're actually losing some objects as well, because I think it basically says like, if it's below a certain threshold, it will just make it kind of invisible or just kind of like smooth it out. So yeah, let's maybe just go 15. No, what we're trying to avoid is getting these kind of like pointy bits here. We don't want them. We want to keep it nice and smooth and organic, but we don't want to over smooth it, that it's just this kind of blob, which is not really what we're after. We want it to kind of look blobby, but not just one blob. It needs to look like it's got all little bits what kind of move and then kind of like crevices in there. So yeah, let's leave it on 20% at the moment. This is looking all good. At the moment, I think it's too kind of circular, too kind of perfect, especially with the twist. It doesn't look very organic at the moment. It's okay, but it could be better. So what I'm going to do is I'll just turn off these 3 at the moment, turn back on the visibility of my sweep. In fact, let's turn off the sweep. What I want to do is go to my original antibody leg spline and select the vertex point and just drag it up, and then select the bottom one and drag it down. And it's just so my starting point, rather than it being a perfect circle, it's going to be just a little bit longer. So if I turn on sweep, turn off the visibility, then let's turn back on the cloner, volume builder, and volume mesher. See how it's now just looks a bit nicer. It's it's longer, it's a little bit closer to what we're after. I'm still not completely happy with this twist, so I'm going to go to my twist, and in the coordinates, I'm just going to just rotate it a little bit. Turn off this preview window, it's going to slow things down. Yeah, so just play around with where your twist is. There's no right or wrong because, again, it's kind of organic. You want it to look as unique as possible. Let's have a look. Cool, looking good. See how we're getting these kind of like holes forming. That is like a look, and it does look kind of cool. But for mine, I don't want really too many of these kind of gaps forming. So all I'm going to do is go back to my cloner, go on object, and let's bump this up to 4,000. So that's basically increasing the resolution. It's just adding more spheres along the clone. So there's more kind of data for it to kind of create a volume mesh from. Another tip is to click on the volume builder. Before, where we clicked SDF Smooth, if you click on it but hold down, you'll see this Dilate and Erode. And what it's doing is, if you offset it to a positive number, so let's say 10, it's going to dilate it or expand it by 10 centimeters, so it kind of thickens it. You might want to go the opposite direction and erode it. So if you go -10, see how it kind of like erodes it away. And this is actually really like, it's a really cool way of kind of eroding things in animations. You might have something what needs to start off as like, I don't know, let's say like a tumor cell or something, and you want it to kind of show that it's kind of eroding away and being destroyed. You can use something like this, let's dilate and erode, to kind of erode it away to nothingness. So yeah, really cool. But for us, we're gonna, let's put it on 8 centimeters. I think that's okay. See, one thing to kind of bear in mind with the volume builder, if your voxel size is like, in our case, it's 4 centimeters, if they're close enough that they're almost touching, the volume builder and volume mesh will basically kind of join the gap, and that might be what you want. But you've got to just be careful of it because it can sometimes join sections you don't really want to kind of join, and it can look a bit nasty. So let's just drop the voxel size down to 3. Is it going to do anything? Oh, sometimes what you'll notice as well, the volume builder and volume mesher, they're really, really powerful, but they can sometimes kind of like grind your computer to a halt if you're not careful. So sometimes you just need to, like, if you click on something and nothing happens, just kind of click off it, click back on it, and then just kind of change the offset amount or like change the voxel size slightly, and it should hopefully fix the issue. Is mine even working now? Yeah, it is. Yeah, just takes a second just to kind of catch up. But yeah, I'm going to leave that here. I'm not too fussed about this being connected here, but I just wanted to kind of show you, if you increase the resolution, which means you decrease the voxel size, it basically means there's more voxels in the scene to fill the space. Whereas if it goes to like 10, just like a blob. So 3, yeah, 3's good. So it should look something a little bit like this. So that's not too bad actually. What I might do, just to make it a little bit less, yeah, okay, let's just do it. If you go back into the sweep, go onto your displacer, and if you just increase the height of that displacer, what that's doing is just affecting that original spline, which is used to create the sweep, which is used by the cloner to reference where to put the clone. So yeah, that's looking good. I like that. So that's basically how you make one of the parts of this kind of Y-shaped kind of antibody we're looking to create. I'm going to get into the kind of rendering and lighting and everything at the end, but yeah, this is the fundamentals. Like, you can effectively go from here, I imagine, but I'm going to keep going. What we want to do is put them all into a group. So highlight them all. If you hold Alt and press G, it groups them all. Let's call this Antibody Leg 01. I'm going to click on it, hold Control or the Apple key or Command key on a Mac and drag it down. Let's call this Antibody Leg 2. And if we go into our kind of reference, you see it's almost like it's like that kind of Y shape, like a kind of long Y shape, but it kind of goes around in like a loop and leaves like a gap in the center of it. And yeah, even in like the kind of, electron kind of microscope kind of versions, which is actually what they look like in real life, you can see the kind of, still that kind of Y shape, that kind of classic Y shape that you're kind of used to seeing with antibodies. So I'm going to go into if you tap this square up here in the top right hand corner of your window, goes into your kind of 4 view. What we want to do is get the second antibody, and we want to lift it up. I'm just going to shift it over to the right. Don't have to be perfect, just, yeah, that looks good to me. Okay, let me just drag this down. Yeah, something like that. So if you remember me talking about the random seed earlier, so a quick way, so say we go, okay, cool, we need this like 3 times, which is what we do. We don't want it to be an exact replica because it just doesn't look organic. Like, weirdly, like your brain will look at something, and even though it's quite a complex object, if they're basically exactly the same, like you just know when you're looking at it kind of visually. So we want to just introduce like as much kind of subtle randomness as possible. So in our antibody leg 02, click on the random effector, which is used to kind of randomize the position of those spheres that we've cloned. Go into seed and just change the number. And every time we change the number, you see it's affecting the position of the spheres. So that's kind of cool. Don't really matter. Let's just go find one we like. Yeah, that one. We also, just to further increase the randomness, if we go into the cloner object, and again, going back to that kind of random seed, we had 100 as our seed for our first one, so let's just change this to 200. Again, it doesn't matter, these numbers don't mean anything, they're literally just a starting point as to where it kind of generates the randomness from. Yeah, that is looking good. And then finally, what we want to do is we want to just change our twist a little bit, just so it's not twisted exactly the same way. So let's remake this less twisty. Yeah, that's looking good. We still want like a little gap in there. Yeah, that's looking good. Yeah, happy with that. That's all good. I mean, if you want to kind of adjust it even further, again, just changing the position of where the twist is, it can kind of have like dramatic effects quite quickly. But yeah, but all the time we're trying to do this is just trying to keep it in that kind of organic world. Like, you know, in real life, it's not like a kind of cardboard cutout like we kind of see in those kind of diagrams. It is going to be kind of blobby and twisted and unique. So that's cool. That's antibody leg 2. So same again, we need the third part or third leg, even though it's not the leg, whatever it's called. The top of the Y, basically, the top of the Y shape. Antibody leg 03. Go back into my front view. If you hold down shift when you move it, it does it in increments of like 5 or 10, depending on how you've set it up. That's looking good to me. What I'm going to do actually is just rotate the whole thing just a little bit. Go back to like Y2. Yeah, cool. And then finally, again, random effector inside antibody leg 3. Go to effector and just change the seed so it's unique. And then parameter, I'm going to go, yeah, I'm going to keep, in fact, I'm going to keep the randomness probably the same in the parameter. That's all good. I'm going to go into the displacer. Oh, another random seed you can change, I didn't mention, is within the actual displacer. So if you remember that noise we created, that's got a seed. And I think by default it's like 665, so whatever. Let's just type in anything. Yeah, that's great. So again, it's being displaced by like a random amount, and from a random kind of seed, a random kind of start point. Let's change this one. Yeah, cool. And let's just have a look how this is going. Yeah, man, this is looking kind of cool. There's other things you can do. I'll try and save a bit of time. We're probably already at about 6 hours. I know I said I was going to do it as quick as possible, so let's just kind of rattle through this. The final thing we need to add is, if you look at the antibodies, they're kind of connected in the middle by these kind of thin, yeah, kind of like proteins that kind of connect them in the middle. So what we need to do is connect them. Like this one needs to connect to this one needs to connect to this one. So they're both kind of connected to this bottom part of the Y. So let's go into the front view. I'm just going to change the display to shading, because another thing to bear in mind is when we get to this point, we might have quite a lot of kind of polygons and lines. So if you've got it in lines, it can sometimes lag your machine down or lag your machine up. So if you just switch it back to quick shading or ground shading, it just helps things a little bit. Okay, next thing is you want to go on the left hand side, your pen, spline pen, hold down when you click on it and click spline pen. All we want to do is really quick, just tap once, tap twice, maybe 3 times, and then just make it kind of go below the surface. Then click off it in the menu up here so it kind of like finishes it. Then we want to go to the spline pen again and do the same thing with this one. Let's just make it kind of go over there. Doesn't have to be perfect. Again, completely unique. These things are organic objects, like they're not going to be kind of carbon cutouts. If you hit enter, oh no, not enter, sorry. If you just click over here, it will deselect the spline, because otherwise, if you've still got the spline selected and you click somewhere in the screen, it's going to keep adding points, which is obviously what you don't want. Just Z out of that. Okay, cool. So selection tool up here, do rectangle selection. We're going to select both splines. Hold down shift when you say spline 1, hold down shift, spline 2, so you've got both selected. In this menu at the top here, go into point mode. And then you can just drag a big box, and all that's going to do is select all of these kind of spline points. And the reason we're doing this is at the moment, these are what's called linear splines. So it's like hard edges, like jagged edges, which isn't really kind of great for what we need, especially at this kind of size. So with the point selected, right click, and then click on soft interpolation. What that's saying is these points, instead of them being linear, kind of hard interpolation points, they're soft interpolation, and they will have these little Bezier handles. So they're nice and kind of smooth. So that is cool. So all we really need to do now is let's just duplicate, I don't know, leg 1. Let's call this connect 01. So we still need a volume mesher, we still need a cloner, but we only want it to really clone this little section here. So let's take our spline 1, so let's call this spline connect 01. Get rid of this antibody leg spline because we don't need it. We don't need to re-clone that antibody leg, so just delete it. Drag your new spline in. If I just turn this visibility on, oh, it's already done it. But yeah, you can see what it's done. It's connected. It's created a volume builder from that sweep Nurbs. Now, obviously, these little connections are like thin, almost invisible in that kind of microscope view. So what we're going to do is just make this circle, which is, if you remember, it was our profile of the sweep Nurbs. Let's make that down to like 10. See how that affects things. See, it's made it kind of thinner. We don't need 4,000 clones in this like tiny area, so let's just drop it down to like 350. Yeah, so you can get away with less clones because obviously there's 4,000 clones along this entire section here, but in this tiny little section, you don't really need as many clones to still get the same effect. Okay, yeah, I think that's pretty good, to be honest. I'm pretty happy with that. So same again, if you click on the connect, hold Control or the Apple key and drag it down, and all we need to do is just replace this spline connect with the second spline connecting to the other leg. Keep calling it a leg. Some guy's going to come in here and say, excuse me, that's not a leg, that's actually whatever. But yeah, we're just calling it a leg. Delete that. So now it's done the same thing. It's created another connection based on this spline, which is really cool. Let's just randomize it again, like we was doing earlier. We don't want it to be a carbon copy. Okay, so I would probably, should have said this, save like as you go along with this, because the volume builder and volume mesher in conjunction with lots of clones is like very fickle. It will crash at a moment's notice, and you just lost all your work. And yeah, but yeah, if you look at this is basically the geometry. So we're now at the render stage. What I might do is pause it before we go into the render stage and maybe make it to a second video. So let's catch up in just a moment. Okay, so I'm not sure whether I'm going to split this into two videos or just keep it as one long video, and I'll put some kind of like cue points in there. Probably one long video. I kind of lied at the beginning. It's probably going to be about 45 minutes now, but yeah, certainly not 24 hours or 15 hours or whatever I said. Okay, so something to bear in mind. I'm using Octane render, as I said at the beginning. These days, Redshift is included inside Cinema 4D, but for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to be using Octane render to kind of look and feel what I'm after. You can kind of copy the techniques I use and apply them to kind of Redshift, and to be honest, I think they will transpose across. But yeah, this Octane render is what I use in my kind of day-to-day work, so this is where my kind of expertise lie. Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to create a new Octane material. So you go create, extensions, C4D Octane, Octane material. Great. It's going to apply this to all of the objects, and let's just go into our Octane viewer window. I mean, again, this is where kind of personal preference and kind of maybe project preference comes along. Like, you can get a really nice kind of look just with the kind of default materials in Octane. Like, this is why I love Octane so much. Like, it's so powerful and it's so quick at rendering things. Like, something like this, like, I don't know, 5-10 years ago would have just taken, like, you'd be sitting there for hours just watching it. And if you look, like, I know we're at kind of like a low sample rate, but it's like 2 seconds a frame, like, if that. I know it's a smaller window and everything, but you get the point. Like, it's just so powerful. So yeah, let's just do this. So the Octane material that we're creating, what we want to do is create what's called a transmission material. So it's basically the way that the light, when it hits the material, kind of acts. And with transmission on, it basically lets kind of certain kind of bandwidths of light kind of pass through. It's easier shown than kind of explained, I think. So in the Octane material, you want to go to transmission. In the texture, go down to 2024. Go down to RGB spectrum. In the spectrum, we want to let's just make it slightly blue. Something like that. Doesn't have to be exact. Again, personal preference. But basically, stay on the kind of pale end of the colours, and I'll show you why in a moment. So, as you can see in this window, nothing's really happening. It's not affected anything. And the reason being, in Octane, it defaults to this ambient occlusion direct lighting. What we want to use is something called path tracing. Woohoo, look at that. So, drop your samples down to, let's go 1000. We don't really need diffuse depth of 16. Let's just go 10. Specular depth 10. That's fine. And GI clamp was something I didn't really start kind of adjusting until relatively recently, actually. It does a number of things, but one of them is it just drops your render time right down. So drop this down to like 100. I'll do another video explaining all these settings in more detail, I think, at some point. But yeah, if you just copy these settings for now. Cool, so that's looking all right. So what's actually happening now is it's letting light pass through the object and it's transmitting it through this kind of RGB spectrum of this kind of like light blue. So you can see it's got like a pale blue kind of tint to it. This is going to be really, really useful going forward. What we want to do, because we're on a white background at the moment, we can't really see what's going on. So we're going to go Objects, Texture Environment. By default, it's going to be a white RGB spectrum. So I'm just going to click on there, go black, and the object has disappeared. And the reason the object's disappeared is this Octane sky is now basically creating the lighting for the scene. So it's just effectively wrapped it in this kind of black sphere. So obviously there's no light in there. There's no light kind of bouncing around. So let's go into Objects, go to Lights, let's go Area Light. And then already, I mean, check that out. Already that transmission material is looking wicked. So on your light, I'm just going to pull this one over to the sides. Again, it's really like bright at the moment, but don't worry about it. We're going to fix it. Let's just put it over here. You basically just want the light over at the side of the object. Let's just go a bit further. Oh, like that. Okay. We see it already. You're getting this kind of like dramatic lighting, which looks really cool, and it's really kind of I'd say it's not really common, but quite common in these kind of medical animations, this kind of dramatic kind of cinematic lighting. In the power, let's just drop it down to like 25, and then let's just increase the size of the light. So if you're going to, where am I going? Details, let's just bump up that Y, maybe the X a little bit, put it further back. Okay, cool. So duplicate the light, and I'm going to drag this above it, so put it there, rotate it around 90 degrees. And that's almost like your kind of, you know, like your overhead kind of softbox. Maybe a little bit too powerful, but we'll just leave that for now. Okay, right, so original Octane material that we created. At the moment, the diffuse is on white, but what we want to do is drop the diffuse down to black. So all it's doing now, it's basically applying like no color to the object, but then it's letting through this kind of blue transmission. If you look, it kind of looks like, almost kind of like jelly-like. And again, this might be the look that you're after. I think it looks really nice as it is, but we're going to keep bumping it up and pushing it as far as we can. But if you remember what I said earlier about making it, make sure it's on the kind of pale side of things, if you put it into like the real kind of rich color, it can be quite kind of dominating, and for us, that's not really what we want. But again, you know, if that's what you want for yours, then brilliant, that's what you need to do. Let's just keep it over here. So at the moment, this is a diffuse material, which is basically not a shiny material. If we want it to be shiny, we need to make it glossy. Now, as soon as we make it glossy, our transmission disappears. So you just get this kind of black reflective material, which is completely like miles away from what we want. So let's just undo that. What we're going to do is create a new material. So Octane material. We're going to make this one. We're going to make this one glossy. We're going to click on the texture. We're going to go gradient. We're going to click on the gradient. We're going to make this into 2D circular. Okay, then we're going to select the texture drop down again. We're going to go 2024, C4D Octane, and go into, we need baking texture. And the reason we need baking texture is it allows us to apply these UV transforms to it. Again, it probably doesn't mean anything to you if you're not familiar with them, but if you do this, you'll be able to get it looking exactly how I have. So baking texture. Let's just apply this gradient to our antibody at the moment and see how it looks. So again, that is a really cool look, but it might not be what you need. But you know, it's a real nice kind of style. This might work for exactly what you need it to. So go to the gradient, load preset, and I'm just going to pick one of these presets up here. I don't know. This one was just cold-esque. Give it a second just to download it. And what you'll notice is, hold on, it's still black and white, even though we've selected the color gradient. The reason for that is the baking texture. You just need to check RGB baking. So if you click on your diffuse, click on baking texture, then just check RGB baking, and ta-da, your gradient is now coming through. But if you look, see you've got this kind of like, almost like a veiny type thing kind of running down the side of it. If we click on projection, select this little arrow and then press box. What it does, it applies the gradient across it all. In fact, I don't think box is what we need. I think we need it to be XYZ to UVW. Yeah, that's better. So even though we can see that kind of seam in here, it's basically making, again, you could do like a whole 2-hour long tutorial about what it's actually doing, but it's effectively applying this gradient across this UVW map of the object that it's applied to. So it's all kind of even, and you don't get any of those horrible kind of seam marks. So that's looking good, but we haven't got it as like a transmissive material, right? Like, because it's a glossy object, you can't apply the transmission to it. So this is where the Octane mix material comes in. So for the Octane mix material, we're going to drag in our transmissive material at the top. We're going to drag in our glossy material at the bottom. Let's apply this back to our object. Just delete those. And then check that out. So you've got that lovely kind of like transmissive, kind of almost kind of jelly-like kind of property to the texture, but you've also got the glossiness that comes with it as well, what keeps it kind of looking like organic and kind of like, yeah, like cellular, kind of like liquidy. You can play with this mix amount, so you can have it more kind of solid and less kind of transmissive, or vice versa. So if I do 0.75, see, that isn't far away actually from my current render. So I think that's where I had my previous render at about 0.75. So it's basically 3/4 of the texture is going to be this kind of transmissive, non-glossy material, and then 1/4 of it is going to be this glossy material. The beauty of this is I can now go back into my my diffuse kind of baking texture, and I can make the gradient like, yeah, flame. Let's go flame. So just give it a second to update. Sometimes has to kind of like download them, and it's going through all the different motions in Cinema 4D of kind of baking it and everything. And if you look, see, we've got all that kind of orangey kind of flame gradient kind of showing through a little bit through that kind of transmissive material. And you might think, okay, that's now like a little bit washed out, or like I want to see more of it. So this is where you just go back into the mix material and go like, okay, let's go 0.6, and look, it's really coming along. And this is again where your kind of your unique kind of like style, you can kind of experiment with like different looks for it. And you know, the graphic you're making might have to sit within the kind of the wider kind of style guide of the company or whatever that you're creating the project for. So this is where you can start dropping in their kind of colors into your animation and kind of making it your own. But yeah, this is effectively how we got to create the antibody. I think my gradient was, let's have a look. I think I just dragged in, was it maybe this one? I don't know, something like that. Again, it's the nature of this is it's kind of unique, and that's the kind of, it's almost like the beauty of it. Like every single one of these you create is going to be unique in its own way. And if you need to quickly duplicate this into like another 10 different antibodies, you can just, you know, group the whole thing, create another one, and then just make like a new seed. I mean, just drag it across it, and you can just change the seeds of like the random effectors. So it looks the same, but just like slightly different. But yeah, at the moment, obviously the lighting, it's not picking up the light on the right-hand side there. But yeah, that's the crux of it. So there's one kind of final step I'm going to do just to bump up the kind of render quality and just get it looking as nice as it can possibly be. At the moment, it's a transmissive material. So basically the light is going to be passed through the object and out the other side. You know, it's like a hollow object. So what I want to do is, if you go to your antibody leg 1, 2, and 3, select all 3 of the sweeps, hold down Control or your Apple key, and drag them out. Close that. Oh. So now you should have 3 sweep objects here. The visibility is turned off at the moment, so it's not changing anything. I created just this red Octane material. Just literally just go create extensions, see for the Octane material, double click it, and then red. Drag this red material onto your sweep Nurbs, and then watch what happens when I turn on the visibility. Check that out. All of a sudden, you've got this real nice kind of like shading kind of coming through from the inside of the antibody. It's like a really powerful technique. The only downside, if it is really a downside, is it just increases the render time a little bit. But you know, to me, look at it like that, and then like that, like it's kind of night and day. Like this just looks amazing, and you can further kind of customize it. Like I think on my final renders, I made mine blue, possibly. Yeah, I mean, something like that. It just looks really, really cool. What you'll notice, obviously, the visibility of these sweep Nurbs has to be on in order for this to kind of work and have the light kind of picked up. But the problem is, let me change this to quick shading. You see how the sweep Nurbs is kind of visible, and the reason it's visible is it's following the exact same geometry as these things are kind of cloned along, but some bits of this cloner objects are kind of like randomly dispersed, if you remember that random effector. So this, some of the spheres what we here have kind of moved over to one side, so you can kind of see the sweep Nurbs. All we need to do is let's go into the circles for sweep Nurbs, change the thickness of these circles, or like the radius of these circles. So you can still see a little bit. But what I'm also going to do is go back to my cloner objects. I'm going to bump up the amount of clones. We're on 4,000 at the moment. Let's just try 5,000. And what it's going to do, it's going to make it thicker, and it's going to make it look at a higher resolution. So I hit enter. Boom. So now we can't see the sweep inside. It looks real kind of high quality, if I do say so myself. And yeah, it's looking great. So from this point, you can basically, make it your own. You can play with that twist deformer, make these kind of legs kind of either less twisted or more twisted. Change the colors, so that kind of sweep Nurbs inside, which is being kind of transmitted. Green kind of looks like slime. Red also looks really cool. The original kind of transmission material, we had like a light blue. What happens if you make it like green, slime again, red? Red looks cool. Kind of like yellowy. I mean, there's all sorts of kind of like possibilities with this. Like this kind of looks like fat. So if you're doing like a kind of like a medical animation where you need to kind of show kind of like visceral, kind of like fat, kind of this like yellowy kind of transmissive material with kind of flecks of red on the inside of it could look really cool. Maybe that's a bit too much, but yeah, you get the idea. I hope you've enjoyed it. This is the first one of these kind of tutorials I've ever created. I've been meaning to do one for quite a while now. You know how it goes. Life gets in the way. But yeah, if you like it, let me know, and I'll make more of these things. And yeah, hopefully, even if you're not specifically creating an animation about antibodies, this technique can be applied to anything. I've used this technique to create like virus cells, like human cells, anything which kind of just needs this kind of like organic kind of blobby kind of mesh. I'm not going to go into how I animated it really, but it basically boils down to using another displacer object, put it in the same group. Okay, you know what? I'll just show you really quickly. Put it in the same group, and the same as when you put this as a child of an object. If it's in the same group, it affects everything in the group. Shader, noise. I mean, this may crash at the moment because I've got a million things running at the same time, but hopefully it won't. But check that out. When I've just added this noise and applied it to like the whole thing, you get this real kind of like bumpy, kind of high detailed kind of like geometry. And actually, this looks really, really nice. It doesn't look anything like, my original render, because mine was more blobby, but I mean, there's definitely a place for this kind of render. But let's just assume you don't want it to look like this. Go into the noise, make this like 800%. Okay, yeah, we're back in kind of like blobby land. I'm just going to turn off this preview window. And then in here, see where it says animation speed, pop in like 0.8. And if I just go forward by one frame, you see this kind of volume builder kind of calculation happening. You see it just kind of slightly moving. So look at this section here, for example, when I click next. And if you imagine this is now animated over like 20 seconds, all of these kind of spheres are going to be kind of just moving left and right, because it's all part of like a volume builder. It will keep them all kind of connected and make it kind of look all kind of, all look kind of like gooey and kind of organic. I probably wouldn't recommend just applying this displacer to like your kind of primitive kind of volume builders and everything. What I'd probably say is you want to almost select all, so select children, right click and do let's have a look. Connect objects. Connect objects. What this is going to do, it's going to make a copy of everything in there, but basically turn it into like one polygon, and it's just a lot less calculation because the software doesn't need to calculate the volume builder every single time. So if I now put this object inside my displacer, it should render a look. See, look, I'm doing that in real time. See, it's all kind of like blobby and kind of like moving. I'll go into my live view window. This is going to be a little bit laggy because obviously it's trying to render it as you go. Oh, you can't really see it. But yeah, you're gonna have to trust me. It's rendering, and yeah, and this is kind of like a starting point, so you can kind of get it looking kind of really, yeah, like really organic and kind of interesting as it animates. So yeah, that's it. Hope you've enjoyed it. Project file at the end of the tutorial. Yeah, let me know if you want anything else, any more information, and yeah, thanks for watching.